3 million files, 2,000 videos, one name everyone thought was already exposed. But the newest Epstein release just changed everything. Hidden emails, unredacted victims, powerful people quietly connected, and a system that had years to stop it and didn't. This isn't a recap. It's what they never wanted you to actually see. If anyone thought that Jeffrey Epstein's story was already fully exposed, the newest document release proved otherwise. In a massive disclosure, the U.S. Department of Justice released more than 3 million pages of records in a single drop, pushing the total public archive to nearly 3.5 million pages. The files include investigative reports, internal emails, scheduling records, financial data, metadata, more than 2,000 videos, and over 180,000 images tied to Epstein's activities and the institutions that dealt with him. Officials said the release followed federal transparency laws, but they also admitted that about 200,000 pages were still redacted or withheld because of legal privileges and court orders. On paper, the government claims compliance. In reality, the scale alone creates confusion. Instead of clear answers, the public received a mountain of information with no roadmap. Critics quickly labeled the strategy obfuscation by scale. When millions of files appear at once with inconsistent formatting and little context, meaningful analysis becomes nearly impossible. Lawmakers and watchdog groups argue that flooding the public with data can hide accountability rather than reveal it. The documents show that Epstein's world was far larger than previously understood. This is no longer just a criminal case file. It's an administrative record of how law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and elite institutions interacted with Epstein for decades. Emails from 2013 even show Epstein acting as a connector between wealthy businessmen and women, reinforcing how embedded he remained in powerful social circles long after his first conviction. The Justice Department insists it did not protect anyone, including political figures whose names appear in the records. Still, transparency without clarity leaves major questions unanswered. Millions of pages may satisfy the law, but they don't automatically deliver truth. Then came one of the most damaging failures of the entire release: victim exposure. Despite promises of careful review, redaction errors allowed documents to go public that contained names, contact information, and financial details of Epstein's victims. Attorneys for survivors said at least 31 people who were abused as minors were accidentally identified. Some victims reported harassment shortly after the files went live. The DOJ was forced to pull thousands of documents offline, but the damage had already been done. Advocates called it one of the worst privacy violations against crime victims in U.S. history. Transparency, they argued, should never come at the cost of re-traumatizing survivors. Beyond the human impact, the mistake shattered trust in the entire process. If the government could not protect victims' identities, how reliable was the rest of the release? As journalists began digging deeper, one thing became obvious: Epstein's reach was enormous. The files reference figures from finance, technology, politics, and even royalty. Their names appear in emails, calendars, invitations, and internal notes. Officials stress that appearing in the documents does not equal guilt, but the density of powerful names paints a disturbing picture. Epstein wasn't operating on the fringe. He moved comfortably through elite networks, even after his 2008 conviction. The real shock isn't that influential people appear in the files, it's how normal Epstein's presence seemed in rooms where real power is exercised. The records show that Epstein actively pursued political and institutional access. Emails and scheduling logs reveal repeated efforts to arrange meetings, maintain relationships, and position himself as useful to decision-makers. This wasn't accidental networking, it was strategy. When someone constantly appears near presidents, billionaires, and senior officials, institutions often assume that person has already been vetted. That assumption, the files suggest, became one of Epstein's greatest shields. His protection wasn't secrecy, it was perceived legitimacy. The release also includes documents from 2007 showing that federal investigators once drafted a much broader indictment against Epstein and unnamed co-conspirators for trafficking young girls between 2001 and 2005. That case was never filed. Instead, prosecutors chose a non-prosecution agreement that allowed Epstein to avoid federal charges and serve only 13 months in state custody. The files don't explain exactly why the stronger case was abandoned, but they prove something important. The limited outcome was not inevitable. There was a moment when the system could have gone further. It didn't. That choice allowed Epstein to return to elite society and continue operating in powerful circles. The uncomfortable question now becomes, what could have been prevented if authorities had acted differently back then? The first part of the Epstein files release doesn't just expose crimes. It exposes institutional hesitation, procedural failures, and the cost of treating influence as immunity. Millions of pages later, the story isn't only about what Epstein did, it's about how many chances existed to stop him sooner. And this is only the beginning. After all the anticipation, the ending may be the most frustrating part of the entire release. Despite the disturbing details buried inside millions of files, the Department of Justice says the review is essentially over and no new charges are expected. Officials argue that legal standards and evidence limits prevent further prosecution. In simple terms, the world can now see more of what happened, but that doesn't mean anyone new will face a courtroom. For victims and the public, that message lands hard. The record is larger, clearer, and more unsettling than ever. It exposes missed opportunities, quiet protection, and years of institutional caution. Yet accountability remains frozen in time. The files reveal how power, access, and reputation can slow justice. They show how Epstein's proximity to influence discouraged scrutiny, how early chances to stop him were scaled back, and how transparency alone doesn't guarantee consequences. What we're left with is a gap between revelation and responsibility. The Epstein files didn't just reopen old wounds, they forced a new question into the open. If millions of pages can be released, but no one is held accountable, what does justice really look like? This story isn't finished, it's evolving, and the truth only moves forward when people keep asking uncomfortable questions. Call to action. New channel outro. If you want real stories, real investigations, and the facts others avoid, you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay connected for the next deep dives into power, secrecy, and the stories shaping our world. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What stood out to you in the Epstein files, and what should be investigated next? This is just the beginning.